Well, Josef Gregory Mahoney is a professor of politics and international relations at East China Normal University in Shanghai and joins us further to discuss China and Vietnam. Always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for coming in. Let's talk about the significance of the CPC just ending, and this being really the first visit to Beijing after this. And we heard our reporter talk about the effort to sort of not mend ties, but of course make those ties even stronger moving forward. How significant is this, and what about the timing?
I think the timing is very symbolic. I was looking at some of the photos, and of course these would have been photos that would have been staged by the Chinese and the Vietnamese side. They were extremely positive, smiling, arm in arm, in some photos hand in hand. These are very powerful images that intentionally project comradely relations, both against U.S. splitism and I think against some of the nationalist tendencies towards aggression that we sometimes see in both countries.
And one thing we have heard from President Xi for so long is promoting socialism with Chinese characteristics. How does that work in tandem with what is going on in Vietnam right now, and how will those discussions kind of grow, do you think, in Beijing over the next couple of days?
Well, I can't predict how they'll grow in Beijing for the next few days, but it's very clear that if we look at Vietnam's development path, it runs in parallel with China's quite a bit. Throughout this, although we have had some tensions and problems sometimes between the relationships, in fact, Vietnam is its biggest trading partner by far is China. It has benefited significantly from Chinese growth. The two countries, again, they share similar cultural and political values and systems. And I think that, although we see a lot of people talking about competition, that some businesses are now leaving China and going to Vietnam, most of the research I see says that these developments are complementary, that indeed some manufacturing is leaving China, but it's entering Chinese factories in Vietnam with Chinese machinery and the supply chains flowing through both countries, which is indeed good for both.
You and I are old enough to remember the early 70s when China was still a very struggling developing nation. Vietnam was coming out of the long conflict, first with the French and then the United States. And now look at these two nations. What do you think this says about the massive growth they've had in the last half century?
Well, clearly, in the China case, we're looking at something that is historically unprecedented. And again, Vietnam has been I would never characterize Vietnam as a little brother in this relationship, but clearly Vietnam is a little behind China in the development curve. Certainly it's a much smaller country and it has a different strategic posture and interest and development needs. But it's also, again, learning from China and growing with China. And I think very impressed with what the CPC has been able to achieve in China and would like to achieve similar outcomes in Vietnam.
Real quickly, we're almost out of time, but in my time reporting here, I've really learned there's the difference when somebody refers to an old friend. What do you have to think about that? Is Vietnam the old friend?
I think that word, lao pengyo, I think it is a very important term of affection. It's certainly different from the term that we sometimes use to describe China and North Korea, which tends to be a little more not vulgar but visceral.
Yeah.
So I think that yes, I think that this is we're entering again this new era, and I think both countries' leaders used that term yesterday, a new era of positive relations, one that goes back to an older era of very positive relations and maybe moves past some of the more difficult moments that came out of the late 1970s.